The night shift was usually quiet Edith's hospital, which was both a relief and a curse for Dr. Kate, a fresh face at the hospital. She had heard the usual whispers from her colleagues, stories about unseen things and strange voices, but, being new, she had no real reason to believe them. Although this was her first week working nights at the hospital, she was still getting used to the quiet and the feeling of being alone in the big, empty building. During the day, the hospital was busy and noisy, but at night, it was very quiet. Every hallway, room, and corridor was silent, and it was a bit spooky. As Kate walked her rounds, she noticed how the lights flickered in certain parts of the building, particularly in the old wing, that everyone referred to as Ward 13. No one told her exactly why, but some joked it was unlucky. Others just avoided it altogether. As she passed by the entrance to Ward 13, she thought she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. She stopped and tried to catch her breath as her heartbeat picked up, but when she turned fully, she saw nothing, only shadows. Then, a chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off and told herself it was just nerves. But, as she walked away, she felt something. It was as if she was being watched. Her shadow looked distorted against the wall, stretched and warped, almost as if another shadow was blending with hers. Kate quickened her pace and determined to ignore the unsettling feeling as she finished her rounds for the night. When she returned to her station, she noticed Nurse Clara was watching her closely. Clara had worked here 4 years and had a kind and calming presence, but tonight her face looked pale and concerned. "Are you all right, Dr. Kate?" Clara asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Kate hesitated and unsure if she should share what she felt. "I thought I saw something near Ward 13, she whispered, hoping Clara wouldn't laugh. But Clara's expression turned serious. She glanced around, almost as if she was checking if someone might overhear. "You are not the first to see things there," Clara said in a hushed voice. "Strange things happen in that wing. Shadows that don't belong, cold spots, whispers in empty rooms. Then, you will get used to it." But Kate didn't want to get used to it, and she wanted answers. She wanted to know why Ward 13 felt so different, so haunted, for the rest of the night. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond her sight. She kept her head down and pretended to focus on her tasks, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. Shadows in the dark don't move on their own right. The following night, curiosity got the better of her. Kate decided to explore further and to take a closer look at the mysterious Ward 13. Then, she told herself, it was just for her peace of mind. After all, she was a doctor, a professional. She didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. As she walked down the hallway leading to Ward 13, the familiar chill returned, prickling the back of her neck. The fluorescent lights above flickered and cast an eerie glow over the dull grey walls. Later, she reached the entrance to Ward 13, pausing for a moment. Then, she took a deep breath. As her heart was pounding, slowly, she pushed the door open. Inside, the ward was quiet and still. Like a forgotten relic, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of antiseptic lingered faintly, as though it had soaked into the walls long ago. She walked further in, and her footsteps were echoed softly against the tiled floor. Then, her eyes scanned the empty beds, the silent monitors, and the shadows that seemed to grow darker with every step. Just as she was about to leave one, she heard it. A faint voice. It was soft, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. "Help me." Suddenly, Kate froze and her blood was running cold. She turned with her eyes wide as she scanned the room, but no one was there. She saw the beds were empty and the chairs untouched. Her breath came in short and panicked bursts. as she tried to make sense of it. Was someone playing a trick on her, or had she imagined it? Then, she walked to the far end of the room, hoping to find a patient, anyone who could explain the voice, but there was nothing. Only the silence was pressing in around her. As she reached the last bed, she noticed something strange. A small, worn teddy bear, lying on the pillow. It looked old, and its fur was matted and faded. Then she picked it up, and felt a strange sense of sadness, as though the bear carried a weight of sorrow. Dr. Kate. Their voice was closer this time, almost right beside her. She dropped the bear and her hands were shaking as she spun around, but again, the room was empty. She was scared and her heart was beating fast. Then, she walked backwards slowly, and then quickly left the room. Back at her station, she tried to calm herself, but the voice echoed in her mind. Help me. It had sounded so real, so full of despair. Who was it? And why were they asking for help? She glanced back down the hallway, and a shiver ran through her, as she realized that, whatever haunted Ward 13, was far from gone. Determined to find answers, Kate decided to look into the hospital records. Maybe there was some clue in the files, something that could explain the strange voice, the shadows, and the eerie presence that lingered in Ward 13. She made her way to the records room, where a quiet space filled with rows of shelves, stacked with patient files. Then she scanned the shelves and searched for anything labeled Ward 13. But the more she looked, the more she realized something was wrong. There were no files for Ward 13. Then she frowned and checked each row carefully again. But it was as if the ward didn't exist. With puzzle, she approached the hospital's head nurse, Mrs. Hill, who had worked there for over 30 years. If anyone knew the history of the hospital, it was her. Mrs. Hill, Kate began, keeping her voice steady. Do you know where I can find the files for Ward 13? Mrs. Hill's face went pale. She glanced around and lowered her voice. As she spoke, Ward 13, she whispered, almost as if saying the name alone could summon something. There are no files for that ward, Dr. Kate. They disappeared years ago. No one knows what happened to them. Kate felt a chill because files don't just disappear. She pressed on and hoped for more information. But why? There must be a reason. Did something happen there? Mrs. Hill looked at her, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. You shouldn't know, dear. Some things are better left forgotten. But Kate couldn't forget. The mystery surrounding Ward 13 was growing, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened there. She thanked Mrs. Hill and returned to her station. But her mind was racing with questions. Why would an entire ward's records vanish? And who was the voice that called to her, asking for help? That night, as she sat alone, she felt the weight of the hospital's dark history pressing down on her. The shadows seemed to grow thicker and darker, as though they were hiding something terrible. And in the quiet of the night, she heard it again, the faint whisper, echoing through the empty hallways. Help me. As the days went by, Dr. Kate couldn't ignore the whispers. She kept hearing faint voices, especially near Ward 13. The words were always the same. Help me. The more she heard them, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. Her curiosity grew stronger, but so did her fear. One night, while on her rounds, she noticed something strange on the patient list. One name, Mr. Arlo Gray, kept appearing. But Kate had never met him. She knew most patients in the hospital, but Mr. Gray's name was a mystery. She checked the patient files, but found nothing about him. No age, no diagnosis, just a name and a bed number in Ward 13. Then, Kate felt a sense of dread, and she decided to investigate. She walked down the dark hallway, leading to Ward 13, and her footsteps were echoing in the silence. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As she entered the ward, a chill ran down her spine. The air was cold, almost freezing, and she could see her breath in the dim light. Then, she looked around and tried to find Mr. Gray's bed, but all the beds were empty. Then, she approached the nurse's station. She picked up the logbook and flipped through the pages, until she found a record for Bed 9, Mr. Ollo Gray. It was written in an old, faded ink, as though someone had scribbled it years ago. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She spun around and her heart was pounding. Then she saw a man standing in a hospital gown, and his face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes were dark and empty. He looked at her with a haunting expression, and his lips were parting, as he whispered, "I can't leave." Kate stumbled back, gasping in fear. "Mr. Gray?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded, but his expression filled with sadness. "I have been here for a long time," he said, his voice barely audible. "I am trapped and waiting for someone to help me." Kate felt a wave of sympathy, mixed with terror. She wanted to help, but how? What could she do for a ghost? She reached out and her hand was trembling. But as she moved closer, he faded away and disappeared into thin air. Then, the room grew silent again, and the chill was lifting, as if he had never been there. Kate stood there, shaken and unsure of what she had just seen. She knew now that something terrible had happened in Ward 13, something that had trapped Mr. Gray's spirit in the hospital. But why? What had kept him there all these years? She was determined to find out, even if it meant facing her own fears. Kate couldn't shake the image of Mr. Gray from her mind. His face was so full of pain and haunted her thoughts. Then she noticed the whispers grew louder every night and filled her with dread. She knew she had to dig deeper into the hospital's past if she wanted answers. The next day, she visited the local library, hoping to find old records about Edith's. Then, she found an article from 20 years ago. The headline read, "Mysterious Deaths in Ward 13. 6 patients found dead overnight." Kate's heart raced as she read the article, piecing together the story of what had happened. According to the article, there was a severe storm that night, causing a power outage. The hospital had been understaffed, and when the power came back, 6 patients in Ward 13 were found dead in their beds. The cause of death was unknown, and rumors spread that something unnatural was responsible. Many believed that Ward 13 was cursed. Kate felt a chill as she read and realized that these patients might still be trapped in the hospital. Could Mr. Gray have been one of them? She continued reading and found reports of staff members who had seen shadows, heard voices, and even felt cold touches while working in Ward 13. She returned to the hospital that night and was determined to help the trapped souls find peace. Then, she entered Ward 13 with a flashlight, the dim beam barely cutting through the darkness. The silence was heavy and pressing down on her as she moved forward. As she reached the center of the room, she whispered, "Mr. Gray, are you here?" The room remained silent, but then she heard a faint reply, "We are here." Multiple voices echoed, overlapping in a chorus of sorrow and despair. Kate's heart raced as she felt the presence of more than one spirit. She closed her eyes and felt their sadness and pain. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The air grew colder, and the voices responded, "Trapped, forgotten, waiting." Their words filled her with sorrow and fear, and she knew that these souls would not rest until the truth was revealed. Kate promised herself that she would uncover the mystery, no matter the cost. The next evening, while on duty, Kate noticed an unfamiliar nurse in the hallway outside Ward 13. She wore an old-fashioned uniform, and her hair tied back in a neat bun. The nurse seemed out of place, and her face was pale and expressionless. Then, Kate approached her and tried to introduce herself. "Hello, I am Dr. Kate. Are you new here?" she asked, forcing a smile, despite the strange feeling in her gut. The nurse looked at her with empty eyes, her voice cold and distant. "I am Nurse Hannah," she replied. "I have been here a long time." Kate noticed the way Nurse Hannah's uniform looked different, like it belonged to a different era, and there was something unsettling about her, something that made Kate's skin crawl. "Have you worked in Ward 13 before?" Kate asked, hoping for answers. Nurse Hannah's expression remained blank. "Yes," she said slowly. "I cared for them until the end." Kate felt a chill as Nurse Hannah continued. "I did what I could. But they didn't make it. I stayed with them. Even after the others left." She spoke with a strange calmness, as though she were talking about something mundane. "What do you mean after the others left?" Kate asked, and her heart was pounding. Nurse Hannah turned to her, and her face was cold and unreadable. "They left them to die, Doctor. They abandoned them." Her voice was filled with bitterness and sorrow. "I stayed. I couldn't leave them, and now I am still here and watching over them." Before Kate could respond, Nurse Hannah walked away and disappeared into the shadows. Kate felt a wave of sadness and horror wash over her as she realized the truth. Nurse Hannah was a ghost, just like Mr. Gray. She had stayed behind, caring for the trapped souls of Ward 13. Kate felt a growing sense of responsibility. These souls were suffering, bound to the hospital by a tragic past. She knew that, if she wanted to free them, she would have to uncover the full story of what happened that night. But as she looked down the hallway, she wondered if she was truly prepared to face the horrors that awaited her. Determined to find more answers, Kate returned to Ward 13 that night. She carefully examined the room and looked for anything that might explain the tragedy. She turned on her flashlight and saw that the walls had cracks and the paint was peeling off. At the end of the room, she saw there was an old door that was locked. Curiously, she tried the handle, but it was rusted shut. She tugged harder and her fingers were trembling as she felt a surge of fear. Finally, with a sharp crack, the door gave way, revealing a small, dark room that smelled of mold and decay. Inside, she found a row of old medical equipment covered in dust. The walls were lined with cabinets, and each filled with faded files and broken medical tools. Kate's eyes fell on a stack of patient charts, and their pages were yellowed with age. She picked one up and read the name, Arlo Gray. As she flipped through the chart, she saw notes detailing his final days. The notes spoke of severe pain, fear, and mysterious symptoms that the doctors couldn't explain. She read the final entry, which mentioned an emergency lockdown during the storm that had cut off power to the ward. The doctors had been forced to leave, and the patients were left alone. Her heart sank as she realized the truth. The patients hadn't just died. They had been abandoned, left alone, in pain, and terrified. They had no one to help them. In their final moments, Kate clutched the chart and felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. She understood now why the souls of Ward 13 were restless. They had been betrayed by those who were supposed to care for them. She made a silent vow to help them find peace, even if it meant confronting the dark forces that haunted the hospital. As she left the room, she felt a presence beside her. She turned and saw the faint outline of Mr. Gray, and his face filled with sadness. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Kate nodded and determined to finish what she had started. She knew that freeing these souls wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to face whatever horrors lay ahead. After discovering the truth about Ward 13, Dr. Kate felt a strange connection to the hospital. Each night, as she walked the halls, she felt the presence of those who lingered, lost souls waiting for peace. But she also sensed something darker. something that seemed to be watching her every move. One evening, as she was finishing her rounds, she felt a sudden chill. The hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. She quickened her pace, but the shadows seemed to follow, shifting and growing closer with every step. Then, she stopped and froze, as a dark figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, with hollow eyes that seemed to pull her in. Her heart raced as she tried to move, but her feet felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on her. The figure started to move and glided down the hallway, closer and closer. Kate's breath caught in her throat as she realized she was trapped. Then, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Please leave me alone." Later, when she opened her eyes, the figure was gone, and the hallway was empty once again. But the fear lingered, gnawing at her. She knew now that there was more to St. Edith's than restless souls. There was something dark, something that didn't want her to uncover the truth. Determined not to be intimidated, Kate took a deep breath and continued down the hall. Then, she made her way to the hospital archives, hoping to find more about the hospital's past. If she was going to help the trapped souls, she needed to understand what had caused this darkness to take hold in the first place. Inside the hospital archives, Kate sifted through files and boxes of old documents. She found patient records, doctor notes, and blueprints of the building. Hours passed, and she was about to give up when she found a small leather-bound diary wedged between two old medical journals. The diary was worn, and its pages were yellowed and fragile. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, and as she read, she realized it had belonged to a nurse named Mary. Mary's entries detailed her time working in Ward 13, her struggles with the strange happenings, and the fear that grew with each passing day. One entry, written on a stormy night, caught Kate's attention. Tonight, the power went out, and Ward 13 was left in darkness. The patients were terrified, and so was I. The doctors told us to leave, to lock the doors and wait for the power to return. But how could I leave them alone in the dark? I stayed, but I fear that something else stayed with us. Kate's heart sank as she read Mary's words. She could feel the nurse's fear, her guilt for abandoning the patients. Mary's last entry was chilling. The darkness is growing stronger, and I feel it was watching me and waiting. I don't know if I can keep it at bay much longer. The final pages were blank, as if Mary had vanished before she could write more. Kate closed the diary, and her hands were trembling. She felt the weight of the tragedy that had occurred and the sorrow of those who had been left behind. But more than that, she sensed the dark presence that had haunted Mary, and knew it was still there, watching her. That night, as Kate lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with images of the hospital, the ghosts, and the dark figure in the hallway. She felt a strong urge to return, to confront whatever was haunting St. Edith's. Around midnight, she slipped out of bed and grabbed her flashlight, and made her way back to the hospital. The air was cold and silent. As she walked through the empty hallways, her footsteps echoing softly, she reached Ward 13 and stood in the center, and felt the weight of countless eyes watching her. "I know you are here," she whispered, and her voice was trembling. "I want to help you. Show me what I need to do." The room grew colder. Then, she heard faint whispers all around her. She closed her eyes, focusing on the voices. They were sad, filled with pain and longing. "Help us, free us." Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She gasped and spun around, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder, and she felt a strong urge to look behind her. Slowly, she turned, and her flashlight was illuminating the far corner of the room. There, she saw a shadow figure she had seen before, the dark presence with hollow eyes. This time, it moved toward her, reaching out with long, thin fingers. Kate felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground and determined not to show weakness. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady. The figure's face twisted into a sinister smile. "I want them to stay," it hissed. "They belong to me." Kate felt a chill as she realized the truth. This dark presence had been feeding on the souls of Ward 13, trapping them in the hospital. She knew then that she would have to confront it, to free the souls and bring peace to the hospital. But as she looked into its hollow eyes, she wondered if she was truly strong enough to face it. Determined to free the spirits, Kate devised a plan. She knew she couldn't defeat the dark presence alone, so she reached out to a local historian, Mr. Oliver, who had studied St. Edith's history. He agreed to meet her and share what he knew. Mr. Oliver explained that St. Edith's had been built on land rumored to be cursed. Over the years, many tragedies had occurred, and each seemed to strengthen the darkness that haunted the hospital. He told Kate about ancient rituals that could help release trapped spirits, but warned her that it would be dangerous. "The darkness will fight back," he said gravely. "It doesn't want to lose its hold on them. Are you sure you want to do this?" Kate nodded, and her determination was unwavering. "I can't leave them trapped like this. They deserve peace." That night, with Mr. Oliver's help, Kate prepared for the ritual. She gathered candles, sage, and other items needed for the cleansing. They made their way to Ward 13, and their footsteps were echoed in the silent halls. As they set up the ritual, the air grew colder, and shadows seemed to shift around them. Kate could feel the dark presence watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was to come. Then, Mr. Oliver began chanting softly, and his voice was filling the room with a calming energy. Kate also joined him, and her voice was trembling at first, but growing stronger as the ritual continued. She could feel the trapped souls around her, their sorrow lifting as they were drawn toward the light. But then, the darkness surged forward, filling the room with an intense, oppressive energy. Kate felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, and she knew the dark presence was trying to stop them. She closed her eyes and focused on her desire to free the souls, pushing back against the darkness with all her strength. Then, the room became a battleground of light and darkness. Shadows swirled around Kate and Mr. Oliver, reaching out like tendrils to pull them away from the ritual. Kate felt a crushing weight on her chest, but she held her ground, determined not to let the darkness win. She continued chanting, and her voice was filled with hope and determination. She felt the presence of the souls around her, each one lending her their strength. Together, they pushed back against the darkness, filling the room with a warm, golden light. Finally, the dark figure screamed, and its form was twisting and writhing. As the light grew stronger, Kate could feel its anger, its desperation, as it fought to hold on to the trapped souls. But she didn't waver. She reached out with her heart, offering peace and freedom to the spirits. Slowly, the shadows began to fade, and the oppressive weight lifted. The dark figure shrieked one last time, before dissolving into nothingness, leaving only silence in its wake. Kate fell to her knees, exhausted but victorious. She felt the presence of the souls around her. Their energy was warm and peaceful. She knew that they were finally free, released from the hospital's grasp. The silence in Ward 13 was unlike anything Kate had ever felt before. It was peaceful, almost sacred. She could feel that the spirits were gone, finally at rest. The weight that had hung over the hospital for decades had lifted, and even the air felt warmer and lighter. Mr. Oliver placed a comforting hand on Kate's shoulder. "You did it, Kate. They are free." Kate nodded and felt both relief and exhaustion, but as she looked around the room, she noticed traces of the lives that had once been trapped here. The tattered beds, the faded walls, the lingering sense of sorrow. She realized that her life would never be the same. She had confronted not only the darkness in the hospital, but also the fears within herself. As they left Ward 13, Kate couldn't help but feel a bittersweet connection to St. Edith's. She had come here as an outsider, someone looking for a new start, but she was leaving with a deep bond to the place and its history. She knew she had played a part in bringing peace to the hospital, and she hoped it would remain a place of healing rather than fear. Then, they locked the door to Ward 13 one last time, sealing away the memories and the pain that had haunted it for so long. Kate whispered a silent goodbye, feeling a sense of closure as she walked away. In the weeks that followed, St. Edith's began to change. Nurses and doctors noticed the lighter atmosphere. Patients seemed calmer, and the staff's unspoken fears began to fade. News of the mystery of Ward 13 spread through the hospital, but no one talked about dark shadows or ghostly whispers anymore. It was as if the place itself had been reborn. Kate returned to her routine and felt a renewed sense of purpose in her work. She threw herself into caring for her patients with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Feeling truly connected to each person she helped, she shared subtle details of her experience with close friends, describing it as a transformative time, without delving into the haunting specifics. Despite the relief, she could still sense traces of the energy she had felt during the ritual. The hospital might have been cleared of darkness, but it was a place with a history, a place that had seen both healing and pain. Kate knew that St. Edith's would always hold a mysterious charm, a reminder of what she had faced and overcome. One day, a young patient looked up at her with wide eyes and asked, "Did you really save the hospital?" Kate smiled and shook her head, brushing off the question. But deep down, she knew the answer. She had faced her fears and stood up to the darkness, bringing peace not only to St. Edith's, but also to herself. Months passed, and Kate continued her work at St. Edith's, and her bond with the hospital was slowly drawing to a close. Then, she had received an offer to work in a larger city hospital, and although she hesitated, she felt it was the right time to move on. She had fulfilled her purpose here, and the hospital no longer felt haunted. It had transformed, just as she had. On her last day, she walked the familiar hallways one final time. She paused outside Ward 13 and rested her hand on the door, memories flooding back, the fear, the whispers, the presence in the shadows. It was all so vivid, but so distant now. As she lingered, she felt a comforting warmth around her, as if the spirits she had helped were there with her, offering their thanks and farewells. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she smiled and was grateful for the journey that had changed her forever. With a deep breath, she turned and walked away from Ward 13, leaving it behind but carrying its lessons with her. She knew that wherever she went, she would be stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever challenges life would bring. As she stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the hospital. St. Edith's was no longer a place of shadows and fear. It was a place of healing, both for those within its walls and for Kate herself. She looked back one last time, whispered a soft goodbye, and walked into her new beginning, ready to start a new chapter in her life. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.